Coming up on Network Africa, citizens of one of Mozambique's largest cities, Beira, have been cut off by a huge storm as cyclone Hydai makes landfall. And the trial judge in the case against South African-based Nigerian pastor Timothy Omotosho recuses himself from the case. And relatives of Ethiopia plane crash victims are still in mourning as French investigators begin investigation of the black boxes. Hello and a warm welcome to the program. I'm Teniola Shoboale. People living in one of Mozambique's largest cities have been cut off by a huge storm. Cyclone Hydai, which is carrying heavy rains and winds of up to 170 kilometers per hour, made landfall at the port city of Beira on Thursday evening. The National Institute of Disaster Management says its 500,000 residents are now without electricity and communications have been cut. The cyclone is expected to move west to Malawi and Zimbabwe over the weekend. It follows a week of storms and heavy rains in Mozambique and Malawi that have destroyed thousands of homes. Meanwhile, in Malawi, over 100 people have been killed by flooding in the southern part of the country. Almost 83,000 people have been displaced since the storm that began more than a week ago caused rivers to break their banks.
Malawi is on alert for more rain and flooding as tropical cyclone Idai is expected to make landfall through Beira in neighboring Mozambique. The Department of Climate Change and Meteorological Services says the cyclone is expected to dump heavy rains and winds over Mozambique before moving to southern Malawi and later Zimbabwe. Thousands of people have been displaced with lives and properties lost.
Before my house collapsed, we were already seeing cracks, and soon after, the house came down. We all ran outside and watched it as it fell. We were lucky enough to have got out with only minor injuries, but many other people were killed, and some were badly injured.
The general situation has been very pathetic, looking at the magnitude of disaster that hit the district. Because it has actually displaced about 12,432 households, which is translating to about 52,511 in terms of population. So as you can look at the number of people who have been internally displaced, that's so huge in as much as Chikawa is concerned.
The natural disasters left villages underwater, knocking out power and water supplies in some areas. Malawi's President Arthur Peter Mutharika, who declared a state of disaster in southern Malawi late on Friday, cancelled trips to the northern region of Malawi to attend to the flooding.
Now, a United Nations Environment Assembly meeting being held in Nairobi this week is considering whether to start assessing and setting rules on technologies that could pull carbon out of the atmosphere or block some of the sun's warmth to cool the earth. Delegates have been debating a proposal from Switzerland backed by 10 other countries to begin examining geoengineering technologies, which backers say could help fend off the worst impacts of runaway climate change.
If adopted, the proposal could lead to the highest level examination yet of the controversial technologies, which have gained prominence as efforts to curb greenhouse emissions fall short.
This UN Environment Assembly has decided to take on the most pressing environmental challenges in generations, steadily, committed, united, and determined to seek a sustainable path for future generations. This is the moment in time that will define us. We have the scientific evidence, we have the policies. Now is the time for action.
Opponents say the technologies present huge potential risks to people and nature and could undermine efforts to cut emissions, not least because many are backed by fossil fuel interests. Businesses that make products which promote sustainable development were invited to showcase their innovations and join in discussions away from the main hall.
Of course, the environment is key to any and everything that we do. For us as an enterprise and what we do, we have a global problem on our hands. Water hyacinth is not just a Nigerian problem, it's not just a Kenyan problem. We have 50 plus countries in tropical and subtropical zones that are affected by water hyacinth infestation. And I think this is a good platform to showcase that, you know, the same way we look at things, there's a hashtag clean seas, there should be a hashtag water hyacinth transformed, whereby, you know, there is a concerted effort to look at how we can actually transform this renewable resource into beneficial use on a scalable level.
Environmentalists are pushing for rapid slashing of emissions through the use of greener power, preserving forests, and similar measures to promote sustainable development and combat global warming. Newton Owino, a Kenyan who makes leather products from fish skin, also exhibited his work at the conference exhibition space.
Though I would wish that we have more and more people coming up to innovate based, to come up with innovation based on the water resources. And actually this will help us promote the conservation activities along the water bodies. Yeah, like for example, right now I'm doing the fish skin. Now those who are killing the reptiles like crocodile for skin can now have an alternative, and this is a way of actually conserving the marine ecosystem.
If resource use doubles by 2060, as predicted based on current trends, a further 10% of forest and 20% of habitats, such as grasslands, will disappear.
We've heard commitment from parties, from multilateral organizations, including the World Bank, committing to work with a country like Kenya and other African countries who are badly impacted by climate change. And I think that's a positive step in the right direction. And if other friendly countries and multinational institutions can take similar steps, that will help in addressing the urgent needs of mitigating and adapting to the impact of climate change.
Experts warn that without more responsible, efficient natural resource management, achieving global targets on climate change like the Paris Agreement or sustainable development goals on protecting biodiversity will be difficult.
Joining us now is a climate change expert and environmentalist, Dr. John Osonwa. Firstly, happy birthday, sir, and thank you for taking the time to join us on Network Africa.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
Okay, so let's begin with the UN Environment Summit. The UN wants to build technologies that could pull carbon out of the atmosphere or block some of the sun's warmth to cool the earth. Firstly, how would this work? And secondly, how effective would it be?
You know, currently we already have technology that can pull carbon from industries. We call them net technologies, which are negative emissions technologies. We call them nets. We already have some technology that sequesters carbon as is coming from polluting stacks and industries. But what we are now talking about has to do with pulling carbon dioxide directly from the atmosphere. The technology exists. However, it is very expensive now to have that. If you look at the cost of carbon, when we're doing a carbon credit cost for carbon, cost of carbon is between $5 and $8 per ton. But if you were to sequester carbon directly from the atmosphere, the cost will be about $100 to $600. So that gives you a sense that at this point it is not a cost-effective mechanism. So we need to look at natural avenues to pull carbon from the atmosphere.
What sort of natural avenues could we look at?
Well, the one that is plentiful and natural is trees. We always harp on the need to plant trees, but there really is science behind that, because trees sequester carbon naturally. And when you have a lot of trees, you're going to have a cleaner environment. Not only do trees sequester carbon, they also produce oxygen for us, so they make the air cleaner. So I think instead of going by way of artificial mechanisms, technologies, we should increase what we can do naturally. Planting of trees is one major way. Of course, the most potent way we can address this problem is to reduce our carbon emissions. We are putting out 30 billion tons of carbon dioxide emissions into the atmosphere every single year. And that thing can stay in the atmosphere for hundreds and hundreds of years. So we need to drastically reduce our carbon emissions so that we don't have to spend so much money trying to recapture the carbon that we have put out there.
Dr. John, let's bring it home. The UN Environment Programme is on its 4th day in Nairobi, Kenya. What lessons can Nigeria learn to better protect the environment?
Well, you know, we've had many conferences like this. The seminal one was the Paris Climate Conference, which led to some agreements. The problem we always have with these conferences is everybody knows what to do. The science is no longer a mystery. The pathways to low-emission economies is very clear. What is always lacking is the finance to back it up. Every year, developed nations make pledges and non-binding resolutions and promises as to how much money they will give to developing nations, Nigeria inclusive. Most of them are in Africa here and India, and some of the Pacific Islands. They make all these pledges in hundreds of billions, yet we don't see much action in terms of funding. So that has always been the pivotal challenge. How do we match action with the words? How do we match funding? How do we put our money where our mouth has been? So I think that's still going to be an issue. A lot of the economies in Europe are looking inward. And then you go over to America, you have a Trump who rode the crest wave of America first. And that's what he has been doing. In fact, pulled out of the Paris Agreement in line with his ideology. So we need to confront that challenge of funding, look at alternative ways to create funding. I'm particularly happy with what Nigeria is doing by floating a green bond, which looks to pull in funding globally to do climate change remediation and mitigation projects.
Dr. John, I want to squeeze this question in. Let's talk about the cyclone in Mozambique. This is the first in 19 years, and it is quite rare. Tell us a bit more about that. How can we as a continent tackle this phenomenon?
Well, one of the problems we're having
seems we have lost Dr. John Osawa, but it was an interesting discussion. But we'll move on now to other stories. Many relatives continue to mourn the death of their loved ones who were victims of the ill-fated Ethiopia plane crash on Sunday. Desperate to know what happened and to receive fragments, if not corpses, given the fire and destruction at the site. We'll have more on that just after we take a quick break here on Network Africa. But still ahead. Democratic Republic of Congo have been contained, but the country needs long-term support. Please stay with us.